Good evening and welcome home to Grace Avenue United Methodist Church. We are so grateful to be with you tonight as we continue our conversation called Next Steps. This now is the third full week in which we've been asking the question in relation to all the things that are going on in our country right now. What can we do about some of those things as people of faith? And tonight we have a very important topic as we talk about race and the criminal justice system. I'm joined once again this week by Dr. Ron Henderson, our district superintendent of the North Central District of the United Methodist Church in the North Texas Conference. We're glad to have him with us tonight. Ron, good to see you.
Good to be here once again.
Thank you. And tonight we have the very special honor of having Judge Stacy Williams with us tonight. Judge Williams has been an attorney for 27 years. She's been a judge for the last 10 years. She currently serves as the judge of the 101st District Court in Dallas County, which deals mainly with civil matters, as I understand it. She was elected to that position in 2015 and was reelected to that position in 2018. Now, one of the most impressive things about Judge Williams is that she has wonderful education. She is a graduate of the Hockaday School. She grew up in Dallas, has a twin sister, and they graduated from the Hockaday School. Then she went off to New England to the very prestigious Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. And then she went on to law school and earned her law degree from Georgetown Law Center at Georgetown University. What an impressive record you have, Judge Williams. And we are so pleased to have you with us tonight.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here, but I really have to thank my parents and God. My parents actually believed in education, and I love to tell the story. When I was growing up, 12 years old, I wanted a pair of Calvin Klein jeans. My parents said, no. When you learn to work, you can get the Calvin Klein jeans, but these Lee jeans are going to be good enough for you.
Is that what, did you ever get those Calvin Klein jeans?
When I had to pay for it, I realized it wasn't worth it.
They weren't worth it, yeah. It's interesting how we learn those things
Yes.
in our lives. Well, again, welcome. We are so thrilled that
Thank
you're
you.
here really to talk about a very important subject, but also a very difficult subject. And there are some really hard statistics as we launch into this conversation tonight about race and the criminal justice system. And so I'm just going to kind of open it up for us to just look at that. I know we've been doing our homework all this week, and I just wonder, what are some of the biggest statistics that jump out to you as we talk about race and the criminal justice system? Judge Williams, you want to start?
Sure. The one thing that I started out was just getting the definition of mass incarceration. And you know, the U.S. incarcerates more people than any other nation in this world, more than China, 9 times higher than Germany, 8 times higher than Italy, 5 times higher than the UK, and 15 times higher than Japan. And overall, African Americans are incarcerated at a rate 5 times that of whites. And the one thing that just really struck out was that 1 in 3 black men are incarcerated in their lifetimes compared to 1 in 17 white men. And even though I'm a civil judge, what really struck me is that this is a wider societal issue. Not only black men, but black females are incarcerated at 50% more than white females. And then even at the juvenile level, 32% of the children who are arrested are African American. 42% of the children who are detained are African American. And this what really gets me. 52% of the children whose cases are referred to the criminal courts instead of the juvenile courts, those are African American children. So we're being affected, the entire family unit. And I'm sure we'll discuss it later, but when you look at the scope and how it affects the black family as a whole and whether or not the black family even exists anymore because of these stark statistics.
Ron, you want to jump into some of that?
Well, it was very heartening to hear that. You hear the statistics, but to hear them just now was very startling. It's hard to believe that America incarcerate more people than China, a communist country. I didn't know the statistics for African Americans, but I'm not surprised. I've done several revivals in the state penitentiary, which is a heart-wrenching experience to go in and see 200 or 300 men come to a worship service, and to see 2/3 of them look like they're African Americans, and a goodly number of those look like they're 20 or younger, which means people are getting into this criminal system at a very young age. And I wonder how many of those persons, when they're there, are learning to be criminals versus being rehabilitated. And you probably know more about how many go back a second time or a third time, but to see so many young black men in prison, and I've seen it in several of the units throughout the state of Texas.
Yeah. You know, one of the statistics that struck me has to do with what's happened really during most of my life. In 1970, I was starting my adolescence. I was 12 years old. And in 1970, there were about 350,000 people of all races that were in our American prisons. And today, that number is closer to 2.4 million. Just unbelievable to think that our prison system has grown that exponentially in that amount of time. And there's a lot of factors for that. And a lot of the factors about why our prison system has grown so exponentially, some would say even out of control, has a lot to do with race. And something that we need to own and name tonight and talk a little bit about tonight. So I wonder if we could maybe start there a little bit about there is inequity in our criminal justice system. And I wonder what some of the things are that stand out to both of you in terms of the inequity in our system as we start to talk about this.
Well, I'll start. For me, it's important how blacks have always been seen. And, you know, we can get real holy with this and say it's a sin problem and not a skin problem, but it's a sin problem that's manifested as a skin problem.
Okay.
And from the inception of America's Constitution, even the founding fathers did not see black men as their equal. And even when they were debating the 13th Amendment to make the so-called Negro fully human, the big discussion in Congress were, are blacks going to be equally under the law, or are blacks going to be seen equally racially? And if you said that blacks were going to be equal under the law, then you gather support. But if you thought blacks were going to be equally racially, then you didn't have the support.
Right.
And so the broader society has never seen, not fully seen African Americans, or as we say in the faith, the imago Dei, the image of God in us. And by so many, we've just been identified by our black skin, and even a majority of the society at a certain time in American history, particular supremacists, felt some kind of way that African Americans were inherently and genetically inferior. Now, when we got to the 60s and 70s, to be a supremacist was politically incorrect. But when I say whites that still control everything and control the criminal system, it looked like to me it may be a covert way of propagating white supremacy.
Right. Yeah. Inequity. Judge Williams, you want to say a word about where you see inequity in our criminal justice system?
I hate to say it, but I think it's just all over, and it is the system. You know, back in the 80s when Ronald Reagan came in, and we started this tough on crime, and I think then we started seeing more disproportionate sentences, and black men often receive harsher sentences for lesser crimes. In a study by the ACLU, they said 65.4% of prisoners serving life without parole for non-violent offenses are black, while only 17.8% are white and 15.7% are Latino. So as we see this tough on crime, we see the development of the the criminal complex, you know, the mass building of prisons that are filled up. And then you start looking at, I have practiced criminal law. You just look at the inequities when you go visit someone in prison. It is dirty, it is filthy. If families want to call someone in jail, the prices are outrageous.
Yes.
But that's, and we'll talk about this later, but that's controlled by the county. So even though when I used to think of the term mass incarceration, it's just like, oh my God, what can I do about it? But there are things that individuals can do to help. If you can't dismantle it, at least make it more palatable. We've got judges on the bench who are still tough on crime. We've got a COVID infection rate in Dallas County. Why are you sending nonviolent criminals or alleged criminals to jail because they can't pay bail? Reduce the bail amount and let them get out. It is a ticking time bomb down there, and no one's doing anything about it. You've got to look at the judges. You've got to look at the prosecutors. You've got to look at the DA. You've got to look at the chief of police. You've got to start talking to your county commissioners, and we've got to hold people accountable. I would love for people, if you don't like this, that people are being too tough on crime, go to that judge's courtroom, observe them, start taking notes. Are they sentencing African Americans more harsh than they are whites? Let me tell you, they will listen. You know, if someone, in Houston, there's a lady who's called the accountability person, and she comes in with a big cowboy hat into the judge's courtroom. They know she's coming in there, and I tell you, they really straighten up. But we don't have any, like an accountability person to ensure, for example. And I was very proud of John Creuzot during one of the protests. They lured a lot of the protesters on the bridge, and then they were going to arrest them all. John Creuzot called up the sheriff and said, not happening. You can arrest them. I am not prosecuting them. Clay Jenkins said, I'm not prosecuting them. And I'm sorry, it was Renee Hall, who's not elected. She's appointed by the city council, but called CETA to come in. Is this the way we want citizens of Dallas County treated? But we have to know that we can make a change. We have to hold these elected officials and even people in appointed positions accountable, make them responsible for their decisions. So we're not helpless. We're not hopeless.
Right.
And we can do that.
So, Judge Williams, there are not organizations right now that spend time recruiting volunteers to monitor court systems and things like that?
I'm not aware of it. For example, we have the ACLU and the NAACP,
Right.
but they're more engaged in lawsuits to make those changes. I'm not aware of any organization. Maybe we can start one tonight.
say.
And I love people coming to my courtroom. I want you to come into my courtroom.
Wow.
We need to hold those people accountable, or go watch the prosecutors in court. You know, if you've got a concern, then raise it with John Creuzot, because they're good prosecutors, and there's some really bad prosecutors.
Sure.
They're good judges who, and what we talked about earlier, who are going to treat people with common decency and respect. Even though someone has committed a crime, you can still treat them fairly and honestly and with respect. But there's some judges that don't do that. And they get reelected time and time again. It's frustrating for me because no one's holding them accountable. We're going to only have change. The only way that we're going to get the rates down is to hold people accountable. And just one more.
Come on.
One more
This is
statistics that I love. Even though African Americans and Hispanics make up 32% of the U.S. population, they comprise 56% of incarcerated people. And what I found really interesting, if African Americans and Hispanics were incarcerated at the same rates as whites, prison and jail populations would decline by almost 40%.
Think about that.
Wow.
That's unbelievable. Now, I want to stop just for a second, because somewhere out there tonight, there is a young person who's trying to figure out what their calling is. And one of the things that you may be called to as a matter of justice on behalf of our faith would be to start an organization that would go and monitor what happens in the criminal court system. What a marvelous way to be able to help people then and hold them accountable and be able to then know who are people that we should elect and bring into these positions that can be held accountable. Somebody out there tonight.
And
is
they can
hearing
do
it.
it because you cannot be barred from entering the courtroom.
Right.
Courtrooms are open. So no one, and sometimes some judges get upset when people are observing them and they'll send the bailiff over. No, hold steadfast. You pay your tax dollars. You cannot, only in very limited circumstances can you close a courtroom. As a civil judge, I did it once. I had two high-dollar corporations suing each other, and we were talking about trade secrets and protections. We closed my courtroom for 1 hour. That's the only time I've ever closed a courtroom.
Okay, so here's the other question that I want to go to for a minute, because I don't want to get off too far away from what I think the heart of the topic is tonight, and that is, okay, we've had this build-up in the prison industrial complex. We've had this huge growth in mass incarceration. One of my questions is, who has benefited from that?
Go ahead.
Well, I think the owners of the prison industrial complex, the services that are provided to the prison industrial complex, the lawyers, the cities in which the prisons are located. And in some instances, society has. Because there are bad people.
Okay.
All right, there are some bad people. But what we're seeing now is not necessarily innocent people, but low-level, nonviolent individuals who can't pay bail are getting held in jail.
Okay. Who benefits, Ron?
Yeah, well, when I heard it said people who can't pay bail, it made me think about how we're going to relate also incarceration to poverty.
Okay.
I had an experience several years ago at St. Paul United Methodist Church at a forum, and the police chief was there, the DA was there, the county sheriff was there, and a church full of people, and I was just blown away how angry everyone was. And as I was driving home, I talked with an educator. As I shared with her, I couldn't believe the anger that I experienced. And she explained to me, these are poor people. She was a teacher. And she said, you don't understand these people who are trapped, who don't have access to attorneys, don't have access to the things that you have. And so it was an eye-opener many, many years ago for me to say how much poverty plays a role in people's anger and in incarceration.
Right. Well, in one of the places that I've seen that, I have finished watching twice now the wonderful documentary called 13th. And in that documentary, one of the things that they did is they interviewed this young man who was incarcerated for a crime he did not commit. And they tell his story, but what they also go on then to talk about is that 97% of all the people that are arrested eventually plea bargain. And many of the people that plea bargain those cases are people that cannot afford anything more than a public defender. They are threatened with larger sentences, and so they plea bargain out to a crime they did not commit because they are so threatened by what it could do. And again, disproportionately, what happens is that a lot of the poor people that are in that situation are people of color.
But you know what? I fault the judges for that.
Okay.
Having practiced criminal law, some of my best clients, and they still call me, they have my cell phone numbers, are those that I was appointed to. Judges need to take a better inventory of who are the attorneys who actually represent the defendants who they're appointed to and those who don't. It's courthouse. Everyone knows there are attorneys who will walk into the jail cell and say, no, you're taking this plea now. Talk to the defendants like they're animals. And the judges put up with it because it's helping churn cases through their courts. But again, that's why we need accountability, folks. We need judges to hold attorneys to the same standards of representation as private attorneys. Because a lot of attorneys have both private clients and they'll take court appointments. And sometimes you see the diversity or the difference or the distinction in how they represent that incarcerated or that case where they've been appointed to.
But you also spoke how you saw them. You still saw them as human beings.
Right.
You still saw them as people of value. You still recognized that they were people who could have dignity.
Yes.
And so that's why, to me, race is so important, because when people sometimes see us as black and then dehumanize us, then we don't get the treatment from the very beginning.
Right.
And the sentence, the good, bad sentence from the very beginning, because people have not seen us racially equal. So I'm glad you mentioned how you saw your clients. Even if they had committed a crime, they were still a human being.
They're still human beings, and in fact, they appreciate it. And I still have some of my old clients now. They have my cell phone. They call me. They check on me. I check on them, and a couple of them say, "You were the first person who actually fought for me. You treated me well. You called my parents." You know, it was really a holistic approach. But I think anyone getting government funds should have that approach. But I hold the accountability to the judges.
Okay.
Billy, there may be some accountability for the church too, because the church, of all of our justice ministries, getting involved with ex-convicts is probably where we do our worst job.
Oh, yeah.
And
Right.
I wonder what is
Right.
our role
Right.
when persons have been released, how we really help rehabilitate them.
Right.
To regain their dignity, to walk the moral walk.
Right.
Rather than being treated as a criminal for the rest of one's life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes into that conversation about, the role, again, of prisons. Is it to be rehabilitation, or is it merely just for punishment? And I think you're exactly right. One of the most convicting parts about Matthew 25, Ron,
Yes.
you check off that list. I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. And I was a stranger and you welcomed me. And then you get down to I was in prison and you visited me. And
Yes.
It's I hadn't done that as much as I should. Very much part of our faith. And there are
Yes.
some great organizations. If you're looking for some organizations like the Kairos Ministry to get involved with, these are people that go in to our prisons and continue to share the love of God.
Yes.
And listen to the stories of people who are so valuable. Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges here is that it's not that we just deal with a criminal system, but we start constantly referring to people as criminals.
Yeah.
And once we refer to them as criminals, we start getting other language around that, like, well, these people are thugs, or these people are, all the name calling that goes into that dehumanizes and disregards the fact that these people are children of God, regardless of how they may have gone off the path or had difficulty in their lives.
And that's why it's so important for the churches to have the prison ministries, because they're in prison and they're dehumanized and they're treated worse than animals. So that if we have people from the churches going in, preaching the word of God, knowing that there is someone above who loves them, and then also there's going to be some type of church-related services available for them when they get out. I mean, and that's one thing I love about being a Methodist. We're so welcoming. In my role, quote, as an elected official, I visit lots of churches, and I got a call from someone from another denomination, and he said, because all my friends privately call me Stacy, I got an issue. I've got an ex-con coming to my church, and he was a sex offender. And I said, okay. And he says, well, we don't want them in. I said, well, you can't do that. And he said, well, in my denomination, we can. And I said, are you really then being Christ-like? Are you really being forgiving?
Right.
And I just said, the decision's yours, but I'm telling you, maybe legally you can, but as a Christian, I don't know if that's the right mode.
Okay.
But
Go ahead.
I want to say one of the things we used to do when I was at Hamilton Park, and they probably still do it, is every Christmas we used to prepare baskets and take to various prison units. We'd have a bus to go to Beto 1, Beto 2, and it was putting their Christmas package together, mostly toiletries and one small gift. And you spend the day there. We didn't go in cells or anything, but all the prisons came to an open area. But it was a way to see their humanity, to own their humanity, and to bring some joy into their lives. Hamilton Park used to spend an entire day preparing those baskets. It would be thousands of them.
We still do.
Still do.
We still do.
So, but it's a number of churches that do that. That's why I threw it out.
Right.
Yes.
But what a wonderful thing for churches to partner together to
Yes,
do, right?
yes,
I mean,
yes.
we're always looking for ways to partner with other churches and what kind of things can we do
Yes.
together. That would be a marvelous thing to be able to do together.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to take us on a bit of a turn for a minute. Although we are talking about the criminal justice system, and Judge Williams, you brought up from the beginning the totality of the system. Let's dip our toe into the issue of policing. And wonder what you guys' thoughts are. Obviously, part of what has thrown us into the discussions we're having and created, if you want to say, this crisis or this opportunity has been what we've observed among police work around the country. What's just your gut reaction to where we are with policing today?
I'll follow you.
All right. Okay. Well, I think now the ugliness has been exposed. The
Okay.
scab has been open, and we see what the ugliness, the rottenness that's underneath. So now we're at a point of making changes. I'm not saying totally get rid of the police department, but I'm saying from the top to the bottom. I mean, I think police officers need psychological tests before they even get there. They need diversity training. We need to understand as a society what should we criminalize, what we should not. When I saw the kneeling on the man's neck, I mean, that took it took every bit of me not to keep it going. It was horrible. And then, a week later, we had the shooting at the Wendy's. He was having a regular conversation. What escalated? And I sent a text to one of my best friends in D.C., and I said, and who's African American also, I said, they just hate us. They just hate us. And I'd look. And I say, here I went to Hockaday, I went to Smith, I did a special studies in economics at Yale, Georgetown Law, I'm a judge. And still sometimes if I walk into an expensive department store, someone's following me, or people who don't know that I'm a judge, and I love it when people don't, how I might get treated in a grocery store or when I'm asking for an expensive bottle of perfume. And it was very gut-wrenching, and it is still very gut-wrenching for me, but we're seeing reforms. Is it going to be as fast or to the extent that I want? Probably not, but the fact that people are being cognizant, I mean, what more earth-shattering than NASCAR to get rid of the Confederate flag? And then when they discovered the noose, to see that ocean of NASCAR drivers behind Bubba Wallace, who I didn't know there were any black people in NASCAR until this week. So I mean, change is happening, and the fact that we have the consciousness, I think people are going to we're going to start making changes at all levels, but particularly, go ahead.
Let's not forget the rudeness that black people experience when we're stopped by police if we're driving a good car.
Wow.
A nice car. And I haven't had the experience in Collin County, but I have had the experience in Dallas County. And a policeman pulls me over and said I didn't have a turn signal on. And the police waited for another one to come. So, I'm knowing already I'm being treated suspiciously, not just because of a turn signal. And the police began to ask me about my car. I was pastoring Hamilton Park at the time, only about a block from the church. And he really questioned me about where did I work, and I said, well, I pastor that church right there. I'm a little angry, but really controlled, talking to police officers.
Well, you have to be.
But I'm experiencing the rudeness that I'm in Hamilton Park, and when he asked me where did I work, what did I do, I knew because I was driving a Lexus, he thought I may have been a drug dealer.
Wow.
And to be stopped and no policemen are routinely suspicious of you for no other reason than you're black. And I guarantee you, and I've done it in Collin County, you can go to any of the country clubs here with black men who are going to pull up in the Mercedes and BMWs, et cetera, and everyone would have a story of being stopped by a policeman who was routinely suspicious simply because of a car.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's my recommendation. If you haven't read it, I invite you to read Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers. And if you don't read anything else in that book, go towards the back, and there is a chapter called The Kansas City Case Study, which talks about this dramatic change that happened in policing that started in Kansas City. And it basically was the idea that what we do is try to make more traffic stops, and because they were allowed to make more traffic stops for anything, you know, your tail lights out, you didn't signal when you changed lanes, the police are then allowed to basically survey your car and look in your car, and it was these basically no reason stops, traffic stops, because that was the way they would find other things, and they would attempt it. Well, it worked in this one small, tiny section of Kansas City, and it got so much publicity that police agencies all over the country adopted it. And guess what began to happen? It was not as effective in other places, but they suddenly decided the way to make it the most effective was to stop drivers who they thought were more suspicious, and those happen to be people of color. And so not only are we talking about incarceration, but in terms of policing, a disproportionate number of people of color are stopped every year for traffic violations than are white people. Not because they commit more traffic violations, but because the police use it inappropriately on a search for other crimes.
Well, Billy, I wish you could go back. You may recall this years ago at the church in South Carolina where an Anglo guy goes in and shoots 9 black people.
Yeah.
And I watched his arrest on television. And when the policeman pulled him over, and this guy with a 9mm gun and other guns in his backpack who had just killed 9 people, when the policeman arrested him, he put his pistol in his holster.
Yeah.
You know, now this is a guy who had just killed 9 people, but he's Anglo, and the police didn't even see him as a threat at all.
Right.
And black men, and now black women too, when we're stopped, we know the suspicion, we know the rudeness, right. And we know the game. Keep your hands on the steering wheel.
Do you think, and Judge Williams, you work in Dallas County, do you think we ask our police to do too much? A lot of conversation about I'm not a social worker, I'm a police officer, I'm not a dog catcher, I'm a police officer. I mean, is it possible that we ask our police to do too much, or are they just not trained as well as they should be?
I think training is key. You know, in lots of the news reports, I think police should be members of the community in which they are policing. So if you live 35 miles away from the area in which you are policing, you don't know the families, you don't know the children, you don't know if that's this crazy Uncle Bill who gets drunk every Saturday night and who's not gonna, hurt anyone at all. Mm-hmm. But I go back to psychological training because it's anger management. I mean, there is something depraved about a person who would put their knee on someone's neck for 8 minutes and someone is saying, I can't breathe. Right. There is something depraved, and we have got to root that out. I have policemen who are friends, and then I have others that I pray to God that I would never get stopped by because there are anger management issues. And a lot of it's a highly stressful job. Maybe they need to think about shortening the hours. And lots of education. I mean, you don't have to kill someone. The guy in Atlanta, he was running. Right. Shoot him in the leg. Why do you have to kill someone?
Right. Well, and the thing about the thing in Atlanta was they had his car, right? His car left. I mean, where's he going to run to? I'm going to be back here at your car when you come back, buddy. So, I mean, that's horrible because it's a tragedy. But I just didn't understand if you're in possession of his car, he doesn't have a weapon.
Yeah.
I mean, he grabbed the taser from the police officer. It's just horrible, and it's really disturbing. But I think obviously that's part of where all this starts.
And just think what we would not know
Yeah.
had it not
Right.
been for citizens
Right.
Yes.
filming it.
Right.
Right.
With those we have seen, there's probably dozens, if not hundreds,
Right.
of persons who have experienced the same abuse, and in some cases, death
Right.
that haven't even been brought to light yet. It took 3 months before the Breonna Taylor case started getting any
Sure.
publicity. 3 months. Ahmaud Arbery's case was hid for a couple of months.
And would have gone nowhere had
Yes.
the video not surfaced.
Yes.
Right.
And then
the
that
guy
goes back
wasn't-
to the prosecutor who said, oh, those are my good friends, ex-police officers. Oh, no, we're not indicting you.
Whoa.
Okay, Laura Eccles Richter is with us tonight. We're so appreciative of her work here at Grace Avenue as the executive minister, and she's been monitoring the chat and has questions. You have questions for us tonight?
I do. Somebody asked if aren't there some for-profit prisons,
Yes.
and does that play into some of the injustice in the system?
Well, you've got to keep the prisons filled. And who builds the prisons? Friends of friends.
Right. Yeah, I cannot recommend the documentary 13th enough. There is a whole segment of that documentary that's about the building up of the prison system and who benefits. And yeah, the for-profit prison system seems to me to have a lot of, because it's what you said, Judge Williams, there's all these other things related to it. Food service and, janitorial.
Commissary.
Yeah, everything, yeah.
So the other question is, it's hard to get good information about judges when it comes time to vote them in or out of office. Are there any ideas about how we can vote more knowledgeably?
Yes. First of all, do research. All right? Don't just trust, I don't believe in endorsements because people, to be honest with you, pay for endorsements. So I don't seek endorsements. Find out what their reputation is. Go sit in their courtroom. Read, like the Dallas Morning News will allow the candidates to put their platforms on. Check out their Facebook. Check out their, all their different, I can't remember what, Instagram, Twitter, whatever the social media flavor of the day is.
Where to go to church.
Yeah, or if they go to church, or if they're a believer. Because I don't want to kind of get on my soapbox, but a good friend of mine, Tammy Kemp, showed her faith at the end of the Botham Jean trial, and I'd get lots of questions. And she gave Amber Geiger a Bible, and I said, I know Tammy. She is a Christian, and I bet you she had 3 Bibles in her chambers. And she really thought at that moment that this is what Amber Geiger needed. And so all the criticism, she's bringing Christianity into the courtroom, I say, well, so what? I mean, I say a prayer each and every time before I go out in my courtroom. And I can say it for you real quick, but it just, you have to have some type of moral base.
Yes.
And Tammy Kemp has a moral base. And, she had a 2-week trial, very emotional.
Right.
You've got 2 sides. You're balancing all that. And I think she just became, she was overcome with the Holy Spirit. And to condemn someone for doing that, I was pretty upset because it was a sincere move on her part.
Right. And I would say also, too, in terms of doing research on judges and candidates, that's something that's done well together, right?
Yes.
If you're in an educational environment, you have a study group. And I'm going to look at this, and you're going to look at this, and then we come together and do that. I think that could be extremely valuable instead of trying to say, I've got to do all this all by myself.
Right, and you can find out, are they out in the community?
Right.
I've got my program that I created, the Citizen Civil Academy, which is a free, nonpartisan program to educate citizens about the civil court process. I've taken it all over Dallas County. I've taken it to Collin County and twice to Smith County. Whenever someone asks me to speak, I'm there. There's some judges, they go to work and they never contribute anything back to the community. So if you've never seen them out, you've never seen them do any outreach, you have to make your own decision.
So somebody asked, do judges have a way of holding one another accountable?
No.
Would there be a bar association that would give some oversight?
No. The only oversight would be the Commission on Judicial Conduct if someone files a complaint. But we each run our own little kingdoms.
But that's very rare that someone would file a complaint.
Well, people file complaints all the time, like
Sure.
if you don't rule in their favor, but those are not sustained.
Okay.
Okay, so then you've got what the crazies who,
Okay.
for one reason or another, but there are some actions that probably are raised that are valid.
Yeah, and ultimately, we've talked about monitoring tonight and getting to know
Oh,
the
yeah.
judges and things like that, but ultimately, it goes back to voting, right?
Yes, you have to vote, just don't blindly vote.
Yeah,
And you can't say, like I'll say, there's not one party dominates in good judges. So,
yeah.
you know, really do your homework and ask friends.
So somebody lifted up something that I know has become something that continues to be sort of controversial in all of this, is black on black crime is really bad, is the statement. What is being done to address that?
Well, I certainly won't shun the question. And black on black crime is a reality. Not to excuse it, but when you look at some of the housing patterns, some of the lack of access to good jobs, the anger that has built up over years, in some cases, the lack of policing has created an atmosphere. That's not to excuse it, but when you put all of the poor people in one part of the city and they don't have access to jobs, they don't have access to supermarkets, they don't have access to banks, they already feel robbed of their human dignity, they already have poor self-worth and bad self-images. It creates an atmosphere of crime. That's not to excuse it. It's really not. But it's also to acknowledge that even though it's black on black crime, the whole society has created an atmosphere where people can't breathe and live with human dignity. That's one thought. I wouldn't want the viewer to think that that's indicative of every black community, because in these pockets there are middle-class people who are committed to the community, who are committed to living morally upright lives. I think one of the things that was very prevalent in the civil rights movement of the 60s is that those middle-class African Americans gave themselves to the community. And one of the things we were fighting for in the 60s was an open society, a free society, an integrated society. And many of the beneficiaries of that movement moved out of the cities into the suburbs, and many of their conscience need to be awakened to go back to the community other than to get a haircut and go to worship. To make the sacrifice. Martin Luther King Jr. was a professional person, reared as a middle-class African-American person, who gave his life to the black community. So I think too many of us who have been beneficiaries have not been good stewards of what has been entrusted to us. And so I think there is a part that we have to give back and not just be models, but be mentors. We can go by the school and participate in mentoring, teaching, reading. Big Brothers is a good example of how men who have made it go back and mentor and pour their lives into other people's lives. So I think one of the remedies is of those who have been blessed and beneficiaries have a responsibility to go back to the community and make certain that we don't create a case system where people are permanently trapped.
You want to try this one, Judge Williams?
I was just going to say amen to that.
Okay, amen. You've been in Ron Henderson's Amen Corner before, so
Yes,
that's...
many years.
Yeah, I wonder too, as I think about that, I'm not normally the family values guy, but I mean, I also think about the fact the disproportion of incarceration has broken up so many
Yes.
African American families.
Yeah.
And in the midst of all of those African American families being broken up because of parents, spouses being incarcerated, there is going to be some of that is a result as well. There's a breakdown in family systems, but that's happened over a long period of time.
Oh, I don't think you can divorce it from slavery.
Okay, go ahead.
When family members are sold off,
Right.
and men are treated as studs, and so you got 401 years of where the majority of society broke up black families. I don't think you can separate it from slavery and the impact that has had on black families. I don't think you can separate the impact Jim Crowism has had on black families. That's not to excuse black on black crime, but it is to take a historical
Right.
look
Right.
at, in some instances, overt actions, and in some instances, covert actions that has divided the black family.
Right. Laura?
I would just also add to that I think so often what we see in the media is we don't see as many pictures of white men, white women being arrested. What we see are the mugshots
Right.
of people of color. More often than not, that's what we see. And so there is some of that in which we continue to perpetuate the ongoing myth that
Yes.
then continues to perpetuate the reality of the number of incarcerations that
And you can
happen.
test yourself. Watch the news, and if there's been a crime, if they don't show a picture, usually the defendant is white. But if they show the picture of, they will always show a black person. I challenge anyone to take that test when they watch the evening news.
Wow. Well, it's gone off the air now because it's been pulled, but the disproportionate number of African Americans that were shown being arrested on the series Cops,
Yeah.
I mean, it was sensationalized, and, every night people would turn on just wanting to watch that because it was so exciting to watch those cops, but the picture was also of African Americans being arrested every night. Yeah.
So I wanted to go back, and this is from me personally. I went down to Harlingen, I guess about a year ago, and to a program that was Courts and Ports, and we were there to do some advocacy work on behalf of those who are trying to come across the border. And so we were going into the courtrooms and just sitting and watching the proceedings. However, we were stopped and told that the courtrooms were closed.
Well, that was probably immigration. Immigration is federal, and it's an administrative hearing. And so that's one of the things we talk about in the Citizen Civil Academy, because people just think, oh, I'm going to court. Well, first of all, you have to distinguish if it's federal or state, and then and that was an administrative hearing. And since it was regarding an immigration status or one's ability to stay in the country, those administrative judges who are, I believe they take a test in order to become an immigration law judge. They have that power to do so.
So it was very interesting because of the advocacy group, they limit the numbers, and we finally were able to get in and sit. But it was one of those where they, again, were clear that the treatment of the persons in the room that were being brought before them, that there is a different treatment if there are some people sitting in the courtroom
Yeah, it makes
on behalf of others. And so I think your word about advocacy is so important. I think we don't always recognize what showing up
Right.
means for other people.
it could have an effect.
So,
So Judge Williams, I know one of the things that you mentioned briefly, but I really would like for you to say more about it. You have started this group called the Citizens Civil Academy, which from what I can tell really is based around education, right?
Yes.
And one of our greatest weapons in the fight of systemic racism is to be educated. And I'm just wondering, would you just say a little bit more about how you put that together, what it takes to run it, and maybe even give us some vision of how we might see other similar kinds of groups form in that way to provide education about all kinds of matters in our criminal justice system, not just our civil justice system.
All right. So when I first started campaigning, and people would always say, "Oh, you're a judge, you're going to be throwing me in jail," and I'd say, "No, I'm not going to be doing criminal law, just civil law." So I said, you know what, people need to be educated on the court system because people don't understand it. They don't teach civics anymore. So I came up with the idea of the Citizens Civil Academy, a free, nonpartisan program to educate citizens about the civil court process. So we have 3 sessions. First session is just more explaining the court system, you know, the difference between state and federal courts, what goes on in the state courts. And then we talk about various topics. For example, if you're going to represent yourself pro se, what do you need to know? Or if you're going to hire a lawyer, these are the questions you need to ask the lawyer. Then we give just lots of resources. You know, if you call up a lawyer and ask for a consultation, it might cost you $300 or $400. But the best kept secret in the state of Texas, you can talk to a lawyer for 30 minutes for $20. We give that information at the Citizens Civil Academy. Also, the one reason why people get stopped, and you mentioned it earlier, is because of traffic stops. Well, I don't know about you, but I know people have teenagers, or even once I got a ticket. You get a ticket and you throw it in your car because you don't want to see that ticket ever again. Well, that's why people get stopped, like Sandra Bland. If you went to an attorney and asked them to do a background check on you, $3,000 to $5,000. But at the Citizens Civil Academy, we give you the websites where you can look to see if you have tickets on the local level, county level, or state level, and perhaps take care of them. And then you're protecting your family so that you're not getting stopped at 10 o'clock at night for a headlight or a ticket that they forgot about 2 or 3 years ago. So we're about information, education, and then we also have fun. I mean, we play CCA bingo when I give out prizes. And whenever there's something new, for example, SMU just started a free legal clinic for family law issues. They're down at George Allen twice a week for like 6 months. They also have a civil clinic that people don't know about. And a lot of time there's so many free legal resources, people don't know about it. And so it's important. When you leave the Citizen Civil Academy, you leave with like 30 pages of legal resources and legal information. And I hope that people will take that information and take it to their communities. I've spoken at churches, I've spoken at schools. Like I say, if you invite me, I'll come.
Billy, there's a subject I hope you can get in.
Okay, let's
only
go.
have a few minutes, but one of the things that I participated in that I think is very important that we haven't discussed is the grand jury system. And, you know, I just want to hear you give some discussion. I've served on 2 or 3 grand juries, and you served for 3 months, and I think I was on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So just about every crime that's been committed is coming before the grand jury.
It goes to the grand jury, which again goes back to judge accountability,
Yes.
because judges appoint who sits on their grand jury. And I really wish that they would be more open and publish on their websites who is on the grand. Well,
Yes.
who is on the grand jury, or making sure that their grand juries actually represent a cross section of the community.
Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to get into discussion is that grand juries ought to have people of color on there so that people are not unjustly billed for a crime.
Right. But again, that goes back to the judges.
Yes.
And I always wonder, because I'll have people call up and I'll say, well, you need to contact the judges. Maybe I can understand the identity, but we need some type of public accountability to ensure that the grand juries represent not only the county, the diversity of the county, but you don't want the same people always on the grand jury. There are people that have made careers, 20, 30, sitting on the grand jury, and I don't think that's fair.
And also make certain some people that need to be indicted are indicted.
Correct.
And don't get off. And you also get to hear the police counts of crimes. So I think the grand jury system is very, very important.
Yeah. And I'm kind of stunned. Well, no, I'm kind of just stunned at the moment because if I hear this correctly, now this is naive preacher, but I'm asking the question that because these grand juries are appointed by the judges,
the members are appointed by the
it
judges.
is not uncommon for those grand juries to not be diverse. And that diversity would not just be race, but gender and
Gender,
age as well.
economic,
Wow.
segments of the community.
Gender, yes.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, again, there is something that needs reform,
Yes.
and at least needs strong accountability if we're going to have a criminal justice system.
And
that
the
we all
good thing
can
about a
be
grand
proud
jury
of.
is when the DA presents the case, it is the members of the grand jury deciding whether there's enough evidence to indict this person or
Right.
not. And so it doesn't become the DA's decision, even though the DA can have some influence, but it's merely the evidence that's presented. But persons of color, I mean, that's an empowering thing to hear a case presented and to be able to discuss, there's really not sufficient evidence to indict this person.
Wow. Yeah.
So I just think the grand jury system is very important, and probably a lot of people have been indicted and gone to trials that shouldn't have because there wasn't a diverse grand jury.
Right. We're getting close towards the end, not completely at the end, but I want y'all to think about some last words. And Ron, I'm going to start with you on a last word tonight because you had a story about a lawyer you wanted to tell.
I don't know if I could tell it in 2 or 3 minutes.
Oh, come on.
But I'll say it as succinctly as I can to begin with. It is important to see people as equals, to see the image of God in all people. And the story I had is one of my favorite books is To Kill a Mockingbird. And I was so impressed when I read how Atticus Finch defended this black man, Tom Robinson, who was accused of rape. And I've lived with that my entire life. And then 40, 50 years later, there's a sequel, and Atticus Finch's daughter notices that he goes off somewhere every Sunday. And one Sunday, she follows him, and he goes to the courthouse where he meets a group of other white men, and they're part of the KKK in Alabama. And she is blown to pieces that her dad, who defended this black man in the 1930s, is a part of the KKK. And she couldn't understand it, and as she had this discussion with him and her uncle, is that he was not committed to the person, but he was committed to the law. He was committed to defending the law, but not the person. And to me, that's just amazing because I think before the law, we have to see the person.
Yeah. Amen.
And that goes back to the Constitution, whether persons of color, and particularly black people, were going to be equal under the law or equally racially. That was a big discussion of the 13th Amendment.
Right. Absolutely. So when I introduced Judge Stacey Williams at the beginning, one of the things I neglected to say and have held to the end is that she is a wonderful, faithful member of the Hamilton Park United Methodist Church. So she comes as a person of faith, and we mentioned that earlier. Judge Williams, it has been such an honor to have you with us tonight and to have your input. I wonder if you just have any final words for us.
The pleasure is mine. I think it's just so important that this church and the faith community, that you're addressing the sensitive issue of race, race in the church, race in society. As I mentioned, kind of the ugly scab has been pulled off, and we could easily hide behind it, but the church is taking an active role. So I want to thank everyone for listening, everyone for asking questions. We've got to keep the dialogue open, and we can't be afraid to ask questions or to make statements. And what better place than in the church to do that? So I appreciate the opportunity. I know we only had an hour. We probably could have gone 2 or 3 hours. But the fact that you're addressing the issue and making the issue just available for your parishioners and anyone out in Facebook land to listen and to think about. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. You know, one of the wonderful things about gathering in a community like this, even though we are having to do it in a socially distanced way, is that along the way we journey and we continue to meet new friends. And so,
Yes.
Judge Stacey Williams, tonight, what an honor it is to have you as a friend and to have you come and be a part of this evening. We will next week have one more Next Step conversation, and we invite you to be back with us July 1st at 8:30 p.m. We are going to talk about race and religious expression and get really into the heart of it now that we as the church have kind of looked around and pointed at all these other things and said, look at that, look at that, look at that. We're going to look inside ourselves as the church next week and say, what's going on there? Because obviously our problems of race pervade oftentimes into the church as well. To be with us next week, Dr. Ron Henderson and our Bishop Michael McKee of the North Texas Annual Conference will be here for a special conversation. I hope that you will come and join us next week as we continue to talk about next steps. Thank you for being with us tonight. God bless you.